Good. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Leo Sarley. I'm with the Planning Commission and Chair of the ZOCO Committee. Welcome to the June 6, 2023 ZOCO Zoning Committee meeting. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting, which both electronic participation is legally authorized by the Code of Virginia for the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7, 2022. Members of ZOCO are participating both here and in person and virtually through electronic means. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment, cover a few specifics from how tonight's meetings will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using Microsoft Teams link provided on the ZOCO webpage and the county's event calendar and the email notifications sent to ZOCO email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity, Daniel's here. Please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn off sound of any other devices around to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed and keep your microphone muted as you enter the meeting and during the meeting. Microsoft Team meeting chat will only be used to provide instructions for virtual attendees on how to register public comments and to field general questions about Microsoft Teams. The Teams chat will not otherwise be monitored by staff or the Planning Commission meeting, nor will it be used to collect feedback. Additional notes for our members of the public who would like to provide feedback on comments. Unlike the Planning Commission regular meetings, the ZOCO agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the ZOCO chair's discretion after the committee discussion has concluded. Public comments can be provided by people attending in person and virtually. For in-person attendees who wish to provide public comments this evening, you may indicate on the meeting sign-in sheet that you would like to provide public comments. Don't think we have any public comments. Okay. Someone came in. No, he's on the agenda. All right. Thank you. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment this evening, you may indicate in the Teams chat that you would like to provide public comment, and your name will be added to the list of speakers. As a reminder, you will always have the option to provide written comments via the link that is provided on the Teams chat and on the ZOCO's website. All written comments, whether on paper or online, will be shared with the Planning Commission and posted to the ZOCO page for public viewing. All comments received as of noon today have already been shared with ZOCO. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting and to let me know if we have virtual attendees who would like to provide comments. Mr. Rogers will acknowledge speakers in the team chat. Please indicate in the chat that you would like to provide comment, and your name will be added to our list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meetings, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Okay, that took us about 4 minutes. We'll do a round of introductions and then we'll kick off with our agenda, and I'll do a quick review of those. So I am Leo Sarley with the Planning Commission.
About our planning commission.
Jim Lantelli, Planning Commission.
Matt Suzek, planning staff.
Brett Wallace, Planning staff.
I will stick with the committee. Henley?
Ellie Peterson, planning commission.
Tony Striner, planning commission.
Elizabeth Gearing, planning commission.
Rogers, planning staff.
Great. And online we have Commissioner Weir.
Daniel Weir, Planning Commission.
Welcome. And then any staff? Chris? Ryder is also with the planning department. Great. On tonight's meeting, we have 2 items. First, we're going to review the Pentagon City Sector Plan implementation and changes to the zoning code there. And then next, we're going to talk about the future outdoor dining, food, very cute, and TOSAs, right? Am I remembering that correctly? Temporary outdoor. All right, with that, I will turn it over to Matt for his presentation.
So again, good evening, everyone. Those who know the hats I wear, I guess. Planning coordinator. So in addition to monitoring development activity, any planning activities are usually the things that I try to manage and work with staff to finalize. So what we're going to see tonight is the example of that as we kind of assess policy and look through some of the more technical aspects of zoning ordinance to implementing the plans that we have in the broader 2222 zip code. One of the things, as you may have read in the memo, that we've started to kind of drill further into and reevaluate, maybe is the right word, are references that were adopted by the board just over a year ago when the Pentagon City Sector Plan was adopted. And that led us to consider a more conservative interpretation, if you will, how that zoning helps us implement vision for Pentagon City. So tonight we have two surgical strikes, if you will, in the RA 615 zoning district that help us clarify any remaining ambiguity, which I think is open to interpretation, that allows us to be on the same page, be very clear about what our expectations are and what's permitted as redevelopment begins to occur, to utilize the new sector. So I have a brief presentation I'll go over. Really just helps visualize the memorandum you already read. Like that. So I'm going to basically cover just 4 key areas, give you a quick background into the policy, what our review involved, and also amendments, which is included in attachment 1 at the back. So with that, if we look at County Board adopted in February 2022, it involved obviously the conclusion of a 18-month planning process that yielded the sector plan, but it also involved a number of amendments to some of our other policy documents. These involve the general land use plan, map, master transportation plan map, and also the zoning ordinance. Here, we were basically able to expand note number 4, which previously used to be called the Coordinated Development District, getting the first generation of buildings in Pentagon City, and we are now calling it the Coordinated Redevelopment District. The second generation of buildings begin to be envisioned and ultimately be developed in that part of the county. We've also added a few minor street amendments and some additional patching of the MTP at the same time, but also looked at the zoning ordinance where 2 primary zoning districts that occupy that new district governed by the sector plan could realize the vision in that sector plan, but without rezoning. So in each case, whether it's section 6.5 that deals with RA 615, section 712 that deals with CO2.5 dominant zoning district, we established clear site eligibility standards so that properties that have that zoning and are located in this district can utilize guidance, density, and height provisions that are in the sector. In addition to that, to help complement that, we've also looked at section 9.6, where we have those special planning areas. We created a brand new one for the Pentagon City Coordinated District, Planning District, to make sure that some of that guidance, purpose, the intent, some of the criteria of the county board consideration be included there. Very much like we did with other districts. So with that in place, one of the things that we started to focus in on recently are building heights, specifically as they relate to elder care uses, and also the general provisions for ground floor uses, what's permitted. We started to see that there's a slight discrepancy between the way those categories are explained in the RA 615 zoning district and how they were actually intended to be implemented in the Pentagon City sector. So what I'll try to do is kind of start in each case, give you a sense of what the sector plan includes, and then what the RA 615 zoning district has. And I think once you see that distinction and comparison, it becomes clear what we need to target. So starting with the heights, and again, focusing on the western part of the district that is zoned RA 615, everything else is CO2.5. So in this case, we actually have a number of different height provisions intended to kind of step the density in heights as we get towards the residential neighbors located to the west and south of the district. So kind of working our way up from the south, if you will, you can see the color-coded regions there that essentially start at 3, 4, even 5 stories, build up to 8, ultimately build up to 10 and 12. Then ultimately, as we're southern half of the site, can reach the same heights as the current building heights that you see there, which currently are 17 stories. Northern half, particularly the northeast portion, that area, buildings can reach up to 250 feet as we get towards Army Navy Drive and Joy Street. So these are the provisions that are in the Pentagon City Sector Plan that would apply to any future development. When we compare that to the RA 615 zoning district, again, governing the same area, you can see the provisions on the left that are in the Pentagon City Sector Plan, but on the right, there's a very specific provision that deals with elder care use. Restricts heights to 70 feet. That's an inconsistency we wanted to clarify and make sure that folks that were interpreting this or considering future proposals are not confused about which one of those. Now, similarly, when we look at land uses, particularly uses that are permitted in the ground floor of future buildings, that same western portion of the district, which you can see here on the future retail plan, does envision some supportive ground floor uses that kind of mirror what's happening across Pentagon Row, West Coast as it's built now. We wanted to have some red and gold use categories helping us with various different uses ground floor. But primarily the rest of the area is envisioned to be residential. But because that's the case, when we compare that to the RA 615 zoning district, which references you to the use table 6.1, where all the RA zoning districts are listed, you can see in that far right column there, there's a lot of empty boxes which indicate that some uses that you typically see in mixed-use buildings are actually. So this is another distinction we wanted to clarify, that if you're located in Pentagon City, it's actually not as restrictive. It wants you to use the same options that the Pentagon City Sector Plan allows. And that is really something that represents the county board's most recent guidance in terms of how redevelopment should occur. So with that assessment, what we're also contemplating is this limited to just Pentagon City? This is where things start to get a little bit interesting in that we have a handful of instances of RA 615 zoning properties actually being located in the same area as previously adopted policy guidance in the form of different districts that you can see over time have been adopted. So one of the things we're hoping to clarify before the RTA goes forward is whether or not we need to be generally focused on Pentagon City, or could other districts also benefit from this clarity because they actually offer greater heights than 70 feet. We want to restrict elder care uses. One example that I wanted to highlight here is we actually look at the Columbia Pike corridor. That represents 2 of those instances where we have pretty significant properties that currently are zoned RA 615, but are also eligible to use the neighborhoods from base code, where in those cases, elder care building uses could actually reach heights of 14 stories, significantly taller than 70 feet currently in that district. So that guidance also expressed by the county board, since I think what is permitted, and therefore we want to verify that ambiguity needs to be clarified. Well, we should really restrict this amendment to just Pentagon. That's something we'll follow up on in the RTA. In terms of the actual amendment, really has 2 key categories. On the left is section 65, telling RA 615 standards. Here we wanted to really just focus on uses, make sure that the future retail map found in the sector plan can also be utilized for determining appropriate uses, again, just for properties that are in Pentagon City. And then similarly, the district use standards, 70-foot height restriction is located. We wanted to make sure that there was an exception made for properties in Pentagon City, which could follow the density and height provisions in that sector. And then just to kind of complement that on the other end, When we look at that special planning area, section 9.6, wanted to make sure that as the board considers appropriate site plans, it makes that determination not just on height and density, but also on the appropriate land use mix. So we wanted to kind of elaborate and be more explicit in that regard. And also in section 965, this would be a use section that we're adding at the end of that special planning area, just kind of outline those specific use categories that exist already in the sector plan to make sure that we reinforce that retail map, make sure that those use categories and their corresponding use standards and so changes that we have here, we are currently anticipating bringing to the Crystal and Pentagon Cities Review Council, which is scheduled to meet later this month. We're also going to advertise this in July and likely come back after the summer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Matuzak. So we'll bring the conversation to the committee. Anybody have any clarifying questions or need anything from Mr.
Yeah.
Matuzak?
Um,
Mr. Tell me.
Question. Went through, but I want to make sure I understand. There in that RA 615 zone, multifamilies can be taller than 70 feet, but senior is capped at 7. Do we know why that was put into the zoning ordinance in the first place? Doesn't seem to make any sense.
There are specific reasons. My understanding of it, and I think
Sure.
Very good background there, but my understanding is that RA 615 in many instances represents a kind of a transitional area geographically, where I think you have much lower density neighborhoods next to it. I think we're very mindful of making sure that as additional uses such as elder care are introduced into that zoning district as potential, development uses, that we're very mindful of the heights that it might create, which I think was a sensitive topic for some of the neighborhoods.
Right, but if you can already build a multifamily taller, in older care is a multifamily, really, it just means it's older multifamilies than younger ones. So it doesn't seem, the use isn't categorically different. So why those are limited to 7, whereas others can go taller, doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Do you recall if there was a specific?
I mean, Commissioner Lantelman, your point is well taken. I don't know if I've got anything else to layer in beyond what Matt was describing, just to say it in a different way, candidly. There was a scoping conversation early on in the study. There are other jurisdictions that allow elder care uses in their version of our districts, oftentimes through some sort of special exception. We knew that the commercial mixed use districts we needed and wanted that type of use there. We knew that, and we felt strongly that it was appropriate for the multifamily. But again, looking at a countywide perspective, not doing a parcel by parcel, case by case sort of urban design analysis, we went with a more conservative approach with the building heights.
Okay, that doesn't really give me a satisfactory answer. I mean, I understand.
That's okay.
I'm not arguing with you.
Of course.
It would strike me, if we're going to do this, why don't we just get rid of that section anyway? That restriction RA 615 completely countywide. It doesn't make any logical sense. We really need more elder care facilities. It's not a bad use. It's not an obnoxious use. The massing shouldn't be any different than any other multifamily use. Now, I'd say, why don't we just go ahead and just have the opportunity to do this? Countywide, just pull it out of zoning ordinance.
Commissioner Garen and then.
I concur with you, Jim. I'm remembering something from a few years ago when we were considering an assisted living somewhere, and the parking on that was much higher than anything we were used to. And I'm wondering if this is a vestige of that.
And likewise, I think some of the public comment from these systems about higher rates of like ambulance visits, though I do support this proposal. I like this, but I'm just trying to
Yeah, to get
imagine
to your.
what the answer might be.
Yeah, and it could be, but that's sort of like, it's almost discriminatory.
Yeah.
Because, oh, they're going to be sick. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
nervous about that. And parking, these facilities tend to have less need
It
for
was
parking.
more,
No,
it was more, the staggered times of workers being there around. And yes, there was something with the need to be able to get emergency vehicles in. This is really vague, but I think it was within, maybe I'm the only one who was on. the
you're
last
right. I
conversation.
vaguely remember something like that too, but none of those were
But you're right,
persuasive to
I
me.
agree, it does not seem persuasive.
Yeah, I think defining the problem is probably a little bit helpful. I don't know what we're solving for. You know, I think it's parking. Seems like some of these issues are indeed perhaps viable. Just with our experience with Sunrise recently, there's also a limit to the amount of structure that they're interested in building. So it could potentially be a moot problem just on that alone, although I don't know.
That's because of that, the restrictions of that particular thing, but there are other ones that we have tall ones in the county. Alston,
Right,
pretty
okay.
tall.
Okay, good.
And in New York, they go up even higher.
Right.
And once you can get above 10 stories, concrete and steel, you can do it. On up as much as you want to go up.
So I think one of the things we can do in time for July's RTA is obviously kind of get some additional background on what led to the 70-foot restriction, but also I think closely, is there an overlap between RA 615 zoning districts and other adopted policies where one example that comes to mind, like sliver there, I think height restrictions are somewhere in the 6-story range anyway. So there might be instances where like other policy already restrict height, but broadly, especially in areas where there is no planning guidance, is there a specific reason? why?
And of course, having been involved in the Pentagon City Plan, as you know, fully support all of these changes because it certainly was in what we were contemplating when we were going through this exercise a year or two ago. So all of these are sort of, this is an easy call.
Pull up the map again that showed all the RA 615. Were you asking if this 70-foot restriction should be from all RA 16 or if we should just focus it on Pentagon City area? Is there the question of if it should be expanded?
It's one of our kind of homework assignments.
Okay, because I think the Pentagon City Sector Plan does a nice job showing the tiering that would kind of be applied, whereas in these other neighborhoods, would there be that same protection?
But that tiering works for all buildings, including regular multifamily. So that tiering in Pentagon City, it doesn't matter the usage. That's the massing requirement. So whatever use it's going to be, it's going to have that tiering.
In Pentagon City,
Yeah.
the one that was like the countywide map?
No, the countywide, well, this one, that tiering that's in there, it's only for Pentagon City.
Right, so
On the
if we can
countywide.
look at the map of
Countywide.
the countywide one. So in Pentagon City, we have the tiered protections because of the Pentagon City Sector Plan. Over here, if we were going to expand a lot, remove the 70-foot, limitation, that's Columbia Pike. So if it was maybe over here, would they have the same tiering protections from a secondary plan? Or if we remove that 70-foot restriction, are they going to build a 100-foot elderly care facility right next to us?
That they can build 100.
Oh,
regular.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And that's a
the
great-
distinction. Because all those other zones, especially ones that are not in a planned area, you can already build a multifamily. It goes all the way. So
Yes.
it's just.
It's calling out a specific use.
If we're unsuccessful in describing what's being mitigated by that restriction.
Yeah, I totally support that conclusion. That's, I think, where we're at. What is it that we're solving with this? Again, I didn't participate on the Pentagon ESP quite. Probably should. But I think we'd love to hear the reason behind this highlighting of this particular use.
Would it have something to do with emergency evacuations?
Mr. Chair, as we sort of articulated previously, previously, the building height cap functionally that's in the zoning ordinance is simply a product of form and wanting to be, at the time in 2019, as sensitive as possible to the variety of different occurrences where multifamily zoning would be adjacent to lower density, oftentimes R district zoning. So just kind of bringing things back to the center. I'm hearing, and if Commissioner Lantelme speaks broadly from a consensus perspective, I think that the commission is telling staff that those sorts of small c conservative perspectives that made their way into the zoning ordinance are worth a reconsideration. Yep. Commissioner Lantelme's eyes got really big when I said that. So.
Yes. This is something in my time in the commission, more and more I want us to be looking at why is the zoning? What was the reason behind it when it was done in the first place? Sure. And whenever we have the opportunity to take a look at it, especially if the opportunity to, because zoning changes not happening all the time. So if we have an opportunity to do it, let's really do it. Let's really think it through. Take that, seize those opportunities. Just as we're doing with the with the retail ones where we're loosening up the standards.
Yes.
We should do it for every.
Yeah, I think the analysis that will come back is going to split this into, again, like as I was mentioning, areas where we have overlap with other policies, and areas where I think we're simply just relying on the land use plan and the underlying zoning district for guidance and taking density and growth. The reason I say that is because in instances where I was actually highlighting here, all those other districts already exist. That simply presents as what I call with some overlay district, right? It could be just a second option as a property owner advantage of. Therefore, you are no longer following RA 615, you're following whatever the special district allows.
Looks like
And therefore, we're not even having a conversation about 70. So this might very quickly become, obviously, are there any inconsistencies between those policies or greater focus on areas that are not guided by anything?
It's like some of them are also-
Well, I think it's also nice when we're removing these policies, then it decreases the need for all these land use lawyers that just increase the cost of projects and.
Against this?
Let's job security, but amount of work.
You're available. Don't do that.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions for Mr. Matuzzi?
Question about the proposed vertical retail.
Hmm.
I want to raise this as something for us all to be thinking about. I'm not sure we're doing the best job we can for pickup and drop off, short-term access to retail. And I look at that as we are thinking about redeveloping that entire site and just, want to that out there to, what that will look like.
Can you provide a little bit of background, a little bit of it?
Well, if I understood that right, so he showed a slide that showed the red and gold retail
Right.
across from Pentagon Row and the site that would potentially be redeveloping River. Is that what if I understood this right? So adding some retail on the ground floor there to sort of weave the neighborhood together. And just from my experience over the last 20 years living here, we're still really auto-oriented in our design, but we're trying to reduce some of that. And we don't seem to have really great pickup and drop off. And so we get deliveries blocking bike lanes, blocking parking lanes. So I just want to be thinking of that because we have the opportunity now looking at this big site. How would we do that and do better?
Yeah, and I can confirm that staff from different departments, regular conversations with that owner, with our colleagues in the fire marshal's office. We've taken a very close look about how redevelopment could operate, particularly on Joy Street. How those other modes of travel, pick up, drop off, and just regular travel lanes continue to operate and help us meet a very specific vision. So I think as that development finally gets out of the gates and clarity about how we're solving for all that, doing it holistically. We decide and agree upon Joy Street right across from West Coast, direct impacts on the rest of the property.
Yeah, could it conceivably be an alley for pickup? some sort of, something with the different paved areas, so that like a Wooner. Yeah, just want to put that out there. I'm glad you're thinking of it.
Sector plan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, those are super blocks, so presumably there'll be additional circulation be built into those, which gives an opportunity for some some creative solution. Yes.
I was wondering if the sector plan said anything about curb space management, or I had to think that came up in some way, shape, or form.
It gets at various ranges of detail. We try to do is in each major street segment, so like Joyce Street as an example, it's kind of set expectations for what we want that cross section to look like as development happens. But I think holistically for the entire district, the vision is to make sure that other modes of travel are emphasized beyond cars. Cars are always going to be emphasized. They have to be. There's already specific regulations and standards you have to meet. But how do we do so in a way where that use can continue to operate and people are still going to drive, right? But pedestrians, other mobility options are just as convenient and accessible. That we meet our goal, not really having to have as much parking and rely on, single occupancy.
Right, so once the streets are full with cars, any additional has to be done with all the other modes, which really then have to be accommodated, and more than accommodated, but be really attractive, safe, and easy to use, which meant bike lanes, transit, utilizing the subway, all sorts of transportation management plans. All of that was really a really big part of.
I'm gonna gently coax us back to the consistency with the Pentagon City sector plan conversation. I think this is really relevant, and I think it definitely points to the bigger picture. So I'm glad it was brought up, but I think we need to make sure that you have the feedback and the information that you need to continue working on this inconsistency issue. Anyone else? Right. Assuming we don't have any public speakers or anything like that.
I haven't, and no one's indicated that they're interested in speaking on this item in the chat. I don't think we have any other than Commissioner Weir and Commissioner Berkey. It's just county staff in the chat right now.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our first agenda item. Good? Everybody good? All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Matt, for coming. We will now roll over to item number 2, the future of outdoor dining study. The staff's going to present. Brett is our presenter. I am going to prep the committee. I have a neighbor, Mr. Ethan, I forget your last name. Kearns. Mr. Kearns is going to do a short presentation showing us sort of an instance of TOSA and sort of some lessons that we can learn as we continue the conversation on this. Keeping in mind that this is a unique and a specific setting, so we have to sort of balance the whole with the specific. With that, I'll turn it over to Brett to start our next topic.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Brett Wallace with the Planning Division Urban Design Team. I'm here to provide an update on the future of outdoor dining study, or the food study. We were here last month with the zoning committee where I gave a high-level overview of the study, some of the background on the temporary outdoor seating areas, TOSAs, and then an overview of some of our preliminary staff recommendations. So the outline for the presentation this evening is I'll briefly touch on the study schedule, just a refresher on some of the study purpose and goals, and then I'll dive into the staff analysis and recommendations before closing with the next steps. So for those that are not familiar, the staff launched the study in the fall of 22. We started with phase 1 of the study where we were really doing a lot of information gathering. We were reviewing the existing TOSAs. Again, TOSAs are temporary outdoor seating areas. I'm going to use that acronym a lot this evening. We were reviewing the TOSAs that were installed over the pandemic. We also looked at other benchmark communities, kind of looking at best practices in other cities and jurisdictions. We had some community engagement last fall. We had some online feedback form, received over 2,000 responses. We We hosted a couple of virtual roundtable events where we got a lot of feedback. We then moved into phase 2. We're taking that information and really kind of formulating some of the recommendations that you'll see this evening. Just a point of note that the county board did extend the continuity of governance ordinance, or the COGO, in January, which extends the TOSAs to August 15th of this year. So right now we're really in phase 3, where we're really sharing the information. We're meeting with committee this evening. We've also been meeting with some other relevant commissions, and I'll talk about those in a moment. This really entails zoning ordinance amendments, and then updates to the county's outdoor cafe guidelines. We're looking to go to the county board at the recess meeting next Tuesday for the request to advertise. We'll continue doing commission review, and then planning commission, county board in July for action. So just kind of backing up, really this study purpose and goal was really to look closely at the TOSAs and see what kind of elements could be built into the 2 existing approval pathways for permanent outdoor cafes. And that currently is a by right option and a special exception option. We also were looking at TOSAs to inform other changes to regulations to how we manage outdoor cafes in the public space rights of way. And again, really taking lessons learned over the past 3 years to see how that can help improve the system overall. Early on in the study, we developed some overarching study themes to help keep us grounded. I'm not going to read through all this, but really wanted to highlight that really thinking about restaurants as a public good, activating mixed-use neighborhoods and streetscapes, creating street life. Also thinking about recovery and resiliency for restaurants, how they can bounce back after pandemic and some of the losses they may have experienced. But there's also this idea of different places and different spaces. Not every outdoor cafe is the same. They all have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. It's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to outdoor cafes. So looking at the recommended framework this evening, we have 3 main ingredients. And yes, there are a lot of puns with this study. The 3 main ingredients for this framework include, number 1 is the encroachment ordinance and the outdoor cafe license. This is a new chapter of the county code that's another initiative that's being led by our real estate office. It's going to be inclusive of an administrative process and requirements for an outdoor cafe license to allow the private use of the public right-of-way by paying an application and a fee. I'll talk about that in a moment. But this really stems, I mentioned last month, it came out of the 2015 retail plan. There was a recommendation in the action plan to pursue this administrative license process. And this is also something that a lot of our other neighboring jurisdictions do. So that's one element. Tonight we'll be mainly focused on the zoning ordinance amendments. And really high level, these amendments are permitting outdoor seating in public spaces by administrative review. I'll talk about that in a moment. Big change there. And then we're also looking at the ability to modify parking requirements for outdoor cafes that are located in parking lots by use permit. And I mentioned the outdoor cafe guidelines. This is an all-in-one document, reference manual that was last updated in 2013. We're going to update this document as well to include, introduction, the application and permitting process, clear instructions for applicants, guidance on clear sidewalks, pedestrian safety, accessibility, and any other relevant guidance on building and fire code. Just quickly go over some of the zoning ordinance regulations that we presented last month. I'll go through these pretty briefly. Again, the current approval process for outdoor cafes are either on private property or public right-of-way or public spaces. And so for private property, those outdoor cafes could be approved administratively by the zoning administrator. For public right-of-way or sidewalks, public spaces like privately owned public spaces or plazas, those are currently reviewed by the county board as a use permit. Looking at the zoning ordinance regulations, just providing a definition for what an outdoor cafe is. I'm sure most are familiar with what a cafe is. Do want to note that the outdoor cafes are an accessory use to the main restaurant on the property. We do have different use standards in the zoning ordinance, for both private property and public rights of way, and those are noted here, including for private property, for example, fixtures cannot be permanently affixed to the ground. The cafe cannot be enclosed, or else it would count towards a gross square footage area. There are restrictions on sound, audio, and visual entertainment. And then the outdoor cafe should have fewer seats than the indoor portion of the restaurant. Those last two bullets, those provisions can be modified by the county board by use permit today and pre-pandemic. And for the public right of way I mentioned earlier, the use standards requires that those be submitted as a use permit that's approved by the county. Just further information on private property and parking in specifically. Currently, outdoor cafes on private property can again be approved by right by the zoning administrator. The parking ratio for restaurants has not changed since 1960. That's one parking space for every 6 seats inside the restaurant. I wanted to note that there is no parking requirement for outdoor seating. It's only for the indoor seating. Also, restaurants are exempted from parking if they're within 1,000 feet of metro. This can be also modified by the county permit. And the zoning mandates that the parking spaces only be available to cars, and nothing else. So just for the parking of vehicles. So I've broken it down into 3 groups here. So I'll start first with the outdoor cafes on the public property. And so what we have on this slide is the 3 columns. We have the uses permitted on the left in the blue first 2 columns. There's the by right administrative review process, and then there's the county board use permit. And then the existing standards again in the blue column. So I mentioned the private property that's not encumbered by a public easement could be approved administratively. Just moving over to the right, to the green column, is what we're currently recommending as a proposed would be to continue that. So that private property would still be able to be approved by right administratively. But what we're looking to recommend to change is including the public sidewalks within the rights of way that could also be approved administratively. And that would include utility and street easements. It would exclude the travel way or any kind of on-street parking within the public right of way. And then moving down to the bottom left, the county board use permit. I noted earlier that existing today requires that public right of way and public easement areas or privately owned public spaces or POPs would require a use permit. Again, that's moving up to the administrative pathway as currently recommended. But we are looking to carry over the privately owned public spaces to be approved by use permit by the county board. And I'll talk more about that.
Right. Before we go, I just want to punctuate for the zoning committee. This is your, I think as we were kind of preparing for tonight's meeting, we felt that this slide was sort of like your Cliffs Notes version, your dashboard. And so we end up wanting to return to slide 12 to kind of encapsulate the high level. I think Brett's really condensed and summarized the very high level staff recommendation, the results of the food study in those 3 buckets. And as you'll see, we're going to start, I believe, Brett, with number 3 and kind of work our way up with some of the rationale and some of the analysis behind those considerations. I'll get out of your way.
No, thanks. So starting with the privately owned public spaces, for those who are not familiar, we typically refer to these as POPs. The public spaces master plan that was adopted in 2019 has a definition for these type of spaces, which is noted here. These POPs are typically dedicated or recorded with the deed of public access easement by site plan condition. Throughout the county, we have approximately 75 POPs, totaling approximately 800,000 square feet or roughly 18 acres which certainly contributes to the public space network. We also developed it for the PSMP design guidelines for POPs as well that would be referred to by staff in the review of any kind of alteration to any existing POPs. And just noting the public spaces vision is it really a network of public accessible spaces. In addition to the publicly owned parks, these privately owned public spaces also contribute well to the some additional guidance from the PSMP with regard to outdoor dining in privately owned public spaces and parks. That they encourage outdoor dining in certain contexts, but that they be identified early in the process. It's not an afterthought or retrofitted into an existing plaza or park design. Really should be thought of early on in the design. And then looking at these as mostly temporary events in some of the park spaces. I just wanted to provide a couple of visual examples of outdoor cafes that have been approved in public access easement areas or POPs. These were approved by the county board by use permit.
And I believe we only have a very small number of these. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we have, including the TOSAs that are out there today, about 2 to 3 of these exist today. It's something we discourage, but we do understand that outdoor cafe and dining does help activate public spaces. And if it's done appropriately, you know, the two can work together very well. So that's why we wanted to continue to use the use permit approval pathway to maintain our ability to review these on a case-by-case basis. So our recommendations that you'll see noted in the memo, we are recommending including a new definition to Article 18 for public space privately owned. That's on line 197 in the memo for reference. And the reason why we're doing this is to really distinguish the POPs from the other public easement areas like the sidewalks. And again, we would be recommending that outdoor cafes and POPs be approved by use permit, which is again something that current practice today. The use permit would be required for outdoor cafes and POPs as currently proposed, and we've outlined when the county board finds that the outdoor cafe or the POPs was not provided as a community benefit, part of a site plan project, does not obstruct or deter public access, pathways, or public access to points of interest or other landmark or maybe public art features, and that the cafe be a minor feature occupying a limited amount of space in the POPs. I also would note that the outdoor cafes and POPs would also be required to get an outdoor cafe license. So this slide just kind of summarizes the changes that are for you this evening to the use standards in the zoning ordinance for the public property or the sidewalk areas. The new standards are up at the top, on the top left. So we are requiring a new standard to be compliant with the new Chapter 70 of the county code, the outdoor cafe license. We are requiring a 6-foot straight unobstructed pedestrian clear zone on the sidewalk, and the location to be immediately in front of the restaurant. And then the sound and audiovisual entertainment be subject to hours of operation, but not permitted adjacent to R or RA districts. That's something that carried forward. And then we're also carrying forward some of the other use standards that I mentioned earlier, where the cafe cannot be enclosed, cannot extend past the restaurant's hours, can extend beyond the restaurant's hours, have fewer seats than inside the restaurant, be exempt from the parking requirements. Again, noting those that can be approved, modified by the county. So just to illustrate the clear sidewalk requirement, I mentioned we're recommending a 6-foot straight unobstructed clear path. These are diagrams on the left that were included in the 2013 design guidelines. So the The example on the top shows a straight, clear 6-foot path between the tree pit edge and the outdoor cafe area. We want to avoid or discourage something like in the bottom left where there's a jog or not a straight path for pedestrians to navigate around outdoor cafes. And just a couple of examples on the right of when it's done correctly and when it's not. I did want to provide just an example of an outdoor cafe, or I'm sorry, an example of a temporary outdoor seating area or TOSA that's in the public right of way and a private yard, just to kind of illustrate this a little bit further. So this is a restaurant on the corner. The yellow arrows indicate the outdoor cafe that was approved before the pandemic in 2019. During 2022, the applicant filed for a TOSA, so they further expanded their outdoor dining down the side of the building and even back into a rear private yard, located with the arrows. These are just a couple of images. One on the left looking down the sidewalk, and one on the right looking into the private space where they set out some tables and chairs. So this is a plan view on the left. So the blue area depicts the area that was approved for the pandemic in 2019. This was approved as a use permit in the blue, and then the pink is showing the expanded outdoor seating under the TOSA program. So in 2016, there was a certificate of occupancy, the CO, for 28 seats. And again, that's in the blue area. And then in 2021, they had a TOSA that was approved for 88 seats, the pink area. And so we've kind of outlined, looking at some of these cases, steps that they would need to come into compliance, or if they wanted to keep their outdoor seating as shown in the TOSA, in which case they would need to apply for a new building permit. They would need to apply for a new certificate of occupancy because the 2016 CO is only for 28 seats. If they wanted to keep the 88, they'd have to get a new CO, and then they'd have to apply for the fee for encroachment, the outdoor cafe license. The alternative we just noted is that they could reduce the seats from 88 back to 28 and just go back to their approved use permit. However, that would be a net loss of 60 seats. And then they could apply just for the fee for the encroachment. So we would like to work with applicants to bring them into compliance. I wanted to outline a couple of options for this particular case. Now I'll just move on to private property. Again, this is, again, I believe, a good summary and Cliff Notes version for the private property as well. We've got the existing process on the left and the proposed on the right. I've indicated with the green on the top where we're currently recommending changes. For example, existing for private property, the cafe furniture, including tables, chairs, bars, and service stations, could not be affixed to the ground except for canopies and covers, and that the sound and audiovisual entertainment is subject to the hours of operation. We're currently proposing that the cafe furniture, including the tables and chairs, can be affixed to the ground, and that our recommendation for the sound and audiovisual is not to permit those when adjacent to the RA districts. And of course, one recommendation that was not pre-existing is the recommendation to permit outdoor cafes located on parking spaces that are not required to meet the zoning. So I'm going to skip through some of the other ones in blue, but some of these we're just carrying forward from.
Thank you, Brent. I was just going to urge you to push it a little bit faster if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hours can extend. That's previous.
Excuse me?
Cafe hours can extend beyond restaurant hours. That's accurate. The last one.
That's meant to be a can't, that's a typo.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm a little worried.
The conversation is with the commission and staff. No worries.
Okay, I'll speed things up. Just some examples of all the movable tables and chairs we have, and then some of the examples of some of the canopies and covers that have been built by right private property. So some of these cases were installed as TOSAs may need to come in for building permits, likely would. And then I'll just quickly go through the zoning text amendments. We're recommending changes to Articles 7 and 8, the use tables to permit outdoor cafes, recommended approval process, also to allow them on required parking spaces. For Article 12, the outdoor cafe, we're recommending changes that I've noted on previous slides here, but this kind of summarizes some of the requirements, those three typologies. And then for Article 14, parking, we are recommending provision to permit required parking spaces to be used for outdoor cafe. We'll have one other case study. This is another example, restaurant using parking spaces for outdoor dining. Plan view on the left, they are using 5 parking spaces. This is private property. They did not have a previous outdoor cafe, so this was approved as a TOSA in 2020. 40 seats on 5 parking spaces, and so we've just outlined the two options they could consider moving forward. If they're located on zoning required parking spaces, they would need to apply for a use permit, meet the use standards. However, if they were required on parking spaces that were in excess of the required parking, then they could be permitted to do that if they meet the zoning use standards. So last slide, schedule and next steps. We're doing a commission review. We met with the zoning committee last month, Transportation Commission. Info a few weeks ago, met with pedestrian advisory committee last night. Here this evening, we've got a number of other meetings coming up. Here, I know the county board requests to advertise. We go into Park and Recreation Commission in June as well, and back to Transportation Commission action before going to Planning Commission. County. That's all I have. Just have my contact info and just a link to the study website. Just have time to check it out, or always feel free to contact me with anything.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. We're going to deviate a little bit from the typical, and I'm going to ask Mr. Kearns to give us a 5-minute presentation on a specific instance that to add information to our conversation.
Mr. Kearns, thank you for sharing those slides. I'm happy to coordinate. I'll try to read your mind at work, and if not, just say next slide.
Yeah.
I'll just just a quick thanks for Theo and Elizabeth for allowing me to attend tonight and speaking. Appreciate all the thought that's gone into this process and all of your time on this commission. I think it's valuable for the community, so I appreciate being here. I felt for Leo's comment that my specific use case was valuable for you all to hear. When I talked to Brett and talked to county members, there was very few people that had my circumstance, and as we look forward as a community to try to balance these two things, I think it's important to hear my family story so you all can think about that in context. And to Leo's point, this is just focused on an abutting. So when Brett was saying like R or RA abutting across an alleyway, that's what my scenario is. So this is my case study. That's my family. Just a little bit of character setting for you all. We've lived in Arlington since 2006. We started on affordable housing in Lion Village. Son on the left is Santi. He just turned 10. Augustine's on the right, and that's Ingrid. We're multicultural, multilingual. We speak Spanish in the home, English on the street. Ingrid teaches at Gunston in the immersion program. I work at the International Rescue Committee. We're also engaged in the community, just as you all are, on school committees, soccer, Cub Scouts, local church, etc. Next slide. This is our home. We're on a dead-end street in a first historical townhouse community. And next slide. This is our scenario with the TOSA. And so that's the view from the TOSA, my 2 sons' bedrooms, and then my bedroom. Next slide. This is a view from our home to the TOSA. So I was judging this room. I think this is about the distance from my bedroom to the TOSA. So just to give you perspective on how far we are from this. So next slide. A quick summary of our experience. So we've had a restaurant next to us for as long as I've lived but we've had none of these problems. And so when you bring outdoor seating area in, just like you bring anything, these problems come into play. And so we had outdoor music and we had TVs during the pandemic. I chose not to file a complaint because for Brett's guide, the framework, making sure the restaurants survived and we all lived together as a community. So we had music starting at 8:30 in the morning, running to the end of the evening shift, even when the patio was vacant. We had people yelling profanity during sports events when my kids were outside. We had mic'd trivia nights. And let me tell you, that was fun. We knew a lot of answers by the end of that. We had dumping, urination when there was capacity, lots of people there. People wouldn't want to wait for the bathroom. They would pee on the neighbors, pee on our property, open containers off off the premises, and obviously capacity exceeded. So in summary, some of these things you hear all the time: light, sound, privacy loss, and some of the regulations. So I really applaud Brett's team and everything that you just saw. I think it's really thorough effort. I'm in that net, my family's in that 12% negative. I think it's really important to see there's going to be more use cases like this if we move forward with permanence in some of these areas. I think this is a precedent setting moment. So really want to think about how we can shift some of our policies to protect people in my situation, my family's situation. So with that, turning over to, so I don't have all the information. I think Brett has a lot more context here, but what I heard from him, and we've had a lot of dialogue, so I appreciate that, Brett, thank you, the team is planning to add this to the recommendations, which I did see in the presentation. So prohibiting piped-in sound, audio or visual, video entertainment. I think this is huge. During the pandemic, as I mentioned, this existed. It was terrible. I worked with the county, Brett, Ben, others. They brought the TOSA in compliance. It's been amazing in terms of the change. And I can only imagine this is going to be a big win for us if we can set these guidelines for the community. So fully endorse that. I also have some other recommendations that I've discussed in different ways with Brett, and I know he's managing a lot of different use cases here, and you all are too. So I think another thing we could do for noise pollution is restrict hours more stringently. And I know that in your recommendations, Brett, you had the per use case, we can adjust hours, but I would ask for, a 10 a.m. start, 8 p.m. finish. And during the pandemic, we started piloting. More recently, we started piloting with the TOSA reduced hour schedule, and that also has dramatic impact. Kids start to go to bed at 8. I talked to Leo about, after 8, food service starts to wind down. People are drinking more. Volume only goes up. These types of incidents where things tend to happen. So I think when you're ordering a property, I think there's something to be said there. I also think, and this is an area where I'm getting outside of my expertise, we should think about capacity and fixture. I don't know how in Arlington we set standards for the total capacity of indoor and outdoor against the fixtures and restrooms, but definitely during the pandemic, it was exceeded. And I know the general rule is no more people outside than inside, but when both are in use, it doesn't matter any of the other rules we put in place. If there are more people there, it's just going to create problems for residents. And then the last one's a small thing. I was able to work with the TOSA. I think we should put this more into the guidelines that exist now to have some sort of mutually agreed upon lighting. There is still some lighting that directly shines into our home, and I think it could be something that we could put around to make sure that residents and restaurants work together. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Carnes, for your presentation and for attending tonight's meeting. All right, so the conversation now is with the committee. Any clarifying questions for Mr. Wallace, or do we want to start anywhere before we sort of dive in?
You have a clarifying question. Where you say the TOSA has to be a restaurant, how does that work when you have a restaurant such as like on the corner where it has two sides? Because a lot of them do have stadium, like so Green Pig has it on both sides. Meriden, right there on both sides. Ambar has two sides. Would mean we have to get rid of seating on one side of it, or is as long as it's the restaurant? You're trying to say it has to be up against the restaurant, the actual restaurant. It can't be down the block.
That's the intent, Commissioner tell me that whether it's on this, along this facade or on this facade, that's what we're trying to get.
Front, you
Not
should say
necessarily the
facade.
front yard.
So you should say front, you should say facade. Or on the property, or somehow better definition of that. Front means one side.
You know, where the front door is.
Yeah. Why don't, this has been, the verbiage on this is something that we on staff have continued to iterate.
Okay.
So let us take your
Fine.
feedback. Yeah, so,
It's just
so
feedback,
you're,
just-
yeah, you're hearing the intent is here and here. And you correctly identified that the intent is not down the block or across the street somewhere, something proximate and also not blocking an adjacent business necessarily. Let us take that back and continue to play with the language and offer some reconsiderations.
Okay, great. And up again, as Mr. Kearns has shown against our district, again, you showed green pig. That the issue there on that around the corner was that is up against our district. Two single family houses. That's why originally it wasn't allowed to have seating there, even though it's a nice wide open space bordering on one of the facades of the restaurant. But my understanding is that Lion Park objected to having seating there with the site plan, and it wasn't allowed. Maybe I'm wrong with the history of that, but I thought that was one of the Lion Park objections when that was originally being built. And that's the other thing, site plan, a few of these, like that on that page you have right there, all three of those are site plans. And I think that the middle one, that's actually private property because the property line actually goes up to where the brick ends and the white starts. You might want to check on that. So it's not actually public right of way, unless there was somehow an easement on that. But there's always been seating there, and it's a permanent fencing because it was a site plan and was allowed under the site plan. And for the easements, I know a lot
Yeah,
of
no,
people coming up-
you're,
on the large public easements, some of them I know that we've seen on site plans, when you have a big plaza that's privately owned, the easement is only a strip down the middle, deliberately done to allow some sort of seating on either side or up or in the corner, but the easement doesn't cover the entire open plaza. It's only a strip down the middle. So I guess we want to think through that too and how that works.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't want seating in that easement area, because the whole point of that easement was to be able to pass through.
exactly.
But we deliberately allowed the other area to enliven it by having the eating area. Some of them, it couldn't be exclusive to the restaurant. Anybody could sit there and eat.
Yeah.
But, because I remember that different conditions in different site plans. So anyway, those are what things I would just noted.
Thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi, Commissioner Guevara, and then Commissioner Peterson. Thanks. All I see was Tony, so trying to be consistent. It's proving difficult.
Mr. Kearns, I have a question. Is that Cowboy Cafe, and are you off of Brandywine?
Yes.
Okay. I'm only mentioning this, asking this because I know there are no parking requirements for outdoor seating, right? It's only requirement for indoor. And I've been to Cowboy Cafe and there's very limited parking. And so I'm wondering if we continue to allow this in other locations, right? Like you mentioned, there was one where there was a net increase of 60 seats. With their so they changed from 28 seats to 88 seats, right? There was an increase. This is now Cowboy Cafe.
This is back to the green pig.
Right. And so I'm just wondering how that's going to affect neighbors, particularly in roads like Brandywine, where there is very limited parking.
All walk.
But not that one, but I'm just saying there's other locations there too, other roads.
I think we'd have to consider the context, the review, certainly be respectful of the residential adjacencies. I don't think we have anything built into the recommended zoning text speaking to that point, but something that we always do in terms of our staff review is looking at adjacencies and trying to mitigate any negative impacts where we can. I mean, I think with the case you're talking about, may have been our condition as part of that use permit that noted not expansion along that street with residential. So that's something that we're not recommending changes, that they want to get changes to the use permit, they're going to have to go get a use permit amendment by the county board. So we'd have to go back, again, this is like a case by case, we're going to have to go back and investigate, look back at the use permit approvals, the intent and the conditions that were approved, and be respectful of those going forward. Wouldn't just wipe those clean. They would have to go back forward for an amendment to consider that.
Just clarification purposes, just to make sure. Oh, no, wait. I'll let you go first, Commissioner.
Okay. Well, so I had a similar question to Commissioner Lantelmi, just that middle picture. I noticed that it was a permanent fence, and so I was trying to understand if that was a public right of way we were allowing them to set up patio seating, but then they put in a permanent fence. So that may be their private property. That fence does not.
We'd have to go back and check. Honestly, I just grabbed that picture quickly and
Okay.
threw it on the
Okay,
slide.
okay, that's fine.
But you may be correct in that the property line could be where fencing is and the concrete sidewalk begins, but we'd have to go back and look.
It's the same across the street with Circa, which is a permanent.
As you probably know, the property lines vary all over the county. Sometimes they go out
Really
to the
weird
center line of
property.
the street. So that's something.
And the one on the bottom, Seymour's, that was a Pops.
Yes,
And so for the Pops, would members of the public who maybe got a croissant from that French restaurant that's right next door there be allowed to sit in that seating? Or is Seymour's, because they put the seats there, allowed to exclude people?
technically, yes, they could exclude people if you're not a patron of the business. I think if the board adopts the encroachment ordinance and the outdoor cafe license, and they'll be paying a fee for the use of that public right
Okay.
away.
Because it was their spot, they gave it to us in an easement, and then they are renting it back from the county.
Yes,
There's an added twist because it's all owned by the Crossing. Same landlord for both of those, that
Yeah.
depending on what the lease terms are for each of the restaurants. You may,
Okay. Another question, does alcohol factor into any of this? I imagine outdoors dining might be a little more tenable to somebody if people are sitting outside drinking smoothies versus, taking shots.
so every restaurant would need to follow the Virginia ABC regulations. And the outdoor cafes serving alcohol would have to have a barrier fencing like the example in the middle around it. So it could not be an open cafe like the one in the Seymour's example. Need to have a barrier.
Okay, so Seymour's can't serve alcohol then.
Not currently.
Let us go back and just triple confirm on that.
Okay.
Candidly, I did some investigation and I went to Seymour's for lunch this past week. And, Mr. Chair, I saw a gentleman, order his third old fashioned during lunch. And I was just like, living his best life. So.
Okay. And then my final clarifying question is just about enforcement capacity and in situations Burns mentioned, or since a lot of the pictures that I showed that had the big X, that's not allowed, are from my neighborhood. And I walk through those areas and I see, these seem like violations. Wondering when the civic association are talking about violations of what capacity do you have to get things righted?
Yeah, the maximum occupancy load for both the interior and exterior for the outdoor seating is determined by the Inspection Services Division, ISD. So the final count is typically done through the application for the certificate of occupancy. And so they would be looking at that review. And of course, there's the provision in the ordinance that permits additional outdoor seating above what's allowed indoor, but that would have to be approved by a use permit.
Okay. But for like the sidewalk width issues.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So the sidewalk width that we're recommending is the 6 foot minimum. And unless it's approved as a wider sidewalk on the site plan. In which case applicants would need to go back to the county board to get a site plan amendment if they wanted to say reduce their sidewalk from width from 8 foot to 6 foot, they would have to get that amended. Because a lot of the site plans have conditions with different sidewalk widths for different frontages.
So I guess we have a situation that our civic association is talking about right now, where there's a bar that has pretty much closed off the majority of the sidewalk, and there's just a little walkway now, and they've been trying to figure out how to report this. And so Nick helped me, thank you very much, figure out the right way for them to get the sidewalk reopened, and I guess there's. So, you know, I guess, what kind of capacity do you have if all of these exits that we saw in the presentation are still existing like that? How would, is it possible to get them all fixed within months after this policy, this new policy is?
There's always the complaint-driven way of enforcement, but one improvement that we're seeing with our recommendations is that through this outdoor cafe license that we'd be requiring, that they would also have to get an inspection. They would also have to get an inspection for their certificate of occupancy. That doesn't mean that once the inspector leaves that things change, but we're looking at hopefully doing periodic reviews and inspections of outdoor cafes. And then when the outdoor cafe license is up for its annual renewal, that's also another checkpoint to kind of ensure that the cafe is still in the same configuration and that hasn't, cafe creep.
Yeah, yes, creep is the issue. And then we just also consider, you know, there's been 20 complaints on this particular business for cafe creep. And does that factor into possibly extending the outdoors patio for a year?
And that's on the real estate bureau's side with that license. Again, the sanctity of the public right of way is what you're getting.
Commissioner Strider?
Oh, did you want to go?
No, you go.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, I want to emphasize that we got an inspection. You're very easy. The inspector walk away. All. And so second, I wanted to sort of clarify scenario. How to do that.
The fees are currently being determined at the moment. We presented next week when for us to advertise as options. We are looking to meet with the county board on those fees. There would be fees that were adopted as part of the budget cycle fee schedule, which could be really revisited every year.
Which ones would they
So for the public rights of way on sidewalks or in the public, privately owned public spaces.
be? So 2 and 3. 2 and 3. Yeah, I think that. Okay, and then that would just be a scenario where the outdoor cafes are extending into public spaces and they are paying to occupy that public space. Okay. So regarding the enclosed cafes, could you go forward to the slide that shows the differences? A little further ahead, it lists the differences. Code and that one. Yeah,
Okay.
that one. Yeah, so that line that says can't be included. I noticed in line 149, it says in M districts that outdoor cafes can be enclosed by permit. Is there any reason why that would only be in the M districts? Commissioner Streiner, my understanding is that this provision in lines 149 to 152 was subject of a specified text amendment. Allow us to kind of go back and look into that some and provide, if we can, some of that background for the forthcoming staff report. I feel like this allowance for enclosure, which has in the zoning ordinance has a specific definition. I think there's a specific story behind that. So let us look at that.
And is there any reason why here in Arlington?
Brett, I'll take this one. The idea is that, again, sort of taking a half step back, the idea is that the outdoor cafe space is accessory to and subordinate to the principal use, the restaurant. Once we enclose the restaurant, we're now talking about a building addition, an extension. The idea is that this goes back 40 years.
Sure.
That this is something that's accessory to the restaurant. Now, if there's an opportunity for an expansion or an addition, there are other zoning ordinance amendments that kick in. You can imagine that in an outdoor seating area that can be allowed within setback areas. Right now, except in certain exclusionary instances, we prohibit structures within setbacks to allow for that clear zone to occur. So if we're enclosing an outdoor cafe within a setback, we're now arguably creating another exclusion potentially.
Yeah, because that is the downside.
Yeah.
But my thoughts on that were, if you could include it, number one, it's very crowded.
Sure.
I used to live in Florida. We didn't have this problem. But obviously it gets cold here. Keep that outdoor space.
Okay.
And then second, I think that might help. I'm not sure about it, but that might help sounds, lights, that sort of thing. So it might sort of close off some of the impacts that it has. Those are just things I was thinking. Yeah, I think by permit. It's fine for that. Given specific intent. Those are just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Just going to piggyback on Commissioner Peterson's comments about the sidewalk restrictions and go to the question, perhaps clarifying fixed furniture versus non-affixed furniture. And I'm taking it that includes anything practically, like particularly guardrails. And then taking it a step further, perhaps the fixed guardrails, particularly fence, would probably be better from the enforcement aspect, where those pylons wouldn't accidentally move into the right way. Do we have a position on that, or?
Brett, this is an area where the forthcoming chapter 70 of the county code, that encroachment ordinance, where the operator would need to get the license, kind of sets the table for us. And this is something that we can also clarify. I know we have a lot of homework to do to layer in some additional information for your understanding, but the encroachment ordinance by and large prohibits permanent fixtures to the sidewalk, the public right of way, the public realm. I believe there are some, I don't have the exact verbiage, and you and I have both looked at it, that there is some sort of nominal permission for the restaurateur to affix, I believe, that the boundary, the enclosure, and then there are also follow-on requirements for the restaurateur to restore the sidewalk, to fill in those holes. We can give you that information so you're understanding what is allowed. But again, that's going to be a condition of the license that the restaurateur must adhere to.
Cool.
Yeah,
Commissioner,
I seem to recall something like that. They could screw it, there's a little hole in the side, they can screw it in, but then when time of year ends, it has to come out again. And
Flush.
right, and it's
Capped.
flat. So that's been for years. But I mean, sort of going back, when I was president of my civic association, one of the biggest things we had to deal with the restaurants in the area was noise, And we always work really closely with the county and with the applicants to say, no noise. They could not have any outdoor music. They couldn't have any outdoor loudspeakers. And we even went to the point that when they had the type of thing like the garage door type things that were nice, whether they could open it up, they had to really cut back on the music that could be heard outside. Because we had restaurants that were either backed up against houses or across the street from apartment buildings. And the apartment building people could hear everything. So the noise would just be echoing up and down. So the deal was no amplified sound outside, period. It's just a total prohibition. All the live music had to be indoors. And any recorded music had to be indoors. So that was a non-negotiable. We also had for a long time a sort of this mini council that was set up between county staff, CPHD staff, police department, and the neighborhood representatives and the restaurateurs to raise issues like cases or something like that.
Flagged, the
Something like
Clarendon
this.
Live Entertainment Group.
Maybe that's what it was. I
Yeah,
remember
it's still
sitting in on
functioning and
those.
meeting and in operation. That's Mr. Sutherland, our colleague, is I think one of the primary liaisons.
And we've raised sound issues and hours and,
Yeah.
you know, enforcement of drinking laws
Yeah.
and parking, all those things would come up during that,
Mhm.
those quarterly meetings. And if restaurants just weren't doing good, for them to say, you know, it's been like this is a third meeting, you still haven't dealt with it. So, you know, those type of things are good, you know, they could be done in other areas too. But anyway, the sound signs was an issue. There's no, I didn't see anything here. We just back to simply going by the sign ordinance and allowing like the sandwich signs on the ground. Because they still are being used. That was for OSAN. So those modifications.
There's no recommended changes to the sign code
Okay, so
related
that's
to
fixed.
the food study.
Commissioner Peterson. And then I'm gonna get
It's- oh, no, I'm gonna-
You haven't.
Sorry.
spoken.
No, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure I understood Mr. Kern's case, because you mentioned that it didn't impact too many people in Arlington. So this restaurant converted their parking spaces to outdoor dining. And because they are within 1,000 feet of Metro, they are allowed to continue to do that after it ends, or once August 15th comes around, are they going to have to convert this parking back to parking?
I don't know the legal, you know, the ownership of the parking, if it's shared or between businesses that are adjacent to the Cowboy Cafe. But
It's not 1,000 feet of metro.
yeah, it's definitely not within 1,000 feet of the metro, but they could potentially pursue the use permit modification of the required parking. And then they'd have to meet the use standards that are proposed here, which would limit the size of the space to 612 square feet, which is the equivalent of like 4 parking spaces using our.
Which is about the size of it now, or
4 parking spaces. 612 is 4 parking spaces. I think Commissioner Peterson, there are examples like this throughout the county where the temporary outdoor seating area was permitted by, and the temporary outdoor seating program is not a construct of the zoning ordinance. It's a construct that purely lives within that continuity of government ordinance. So we were talking about kind of arcane information, Commissioner Gearing, before the meeting. There's no vested rights. There's no nonconformities. So on August 15th, those temporary outdoor seating area permits, the validity expires.
okay, so this problem will go away from Mr. Children unless they apply for a use permit, which then theoretically you would be evaluating negative impacts on the neighbors and would
That's correct.
issue the use permit. And same for the Green Pig Bistro, residential homes that are adjacent to that back patio, they will no longer have to deal with this after August 15th. These new proposed changes.
The temporary outdoor seating areas are set to expire on August 15th. But you can understand I'm reluctant to kind of make predictions on various
These
things.
new policies that we are discussing and possibly approving in the
That's-
coming months would not allow these kind of invasive uses to continue.
I think the regulations and some of the recommendations that we're sharing with you tonight would put mechanisms in place to safeguard against those types of adverse impacts from proliferating in our residential areas.
Commissioner Garrett?
I don't have anything.
Was keeping it for a second because I had a bit of a question that I think you might have some good information on. It's the dark skies policy. And if
I don't
that
know.
has any overlay on this, like one of the things on the Cowboy Cafe instance, they have the string of lights, right?
Okay.
One of the things we could perhaps demand is the sort of 180-degree or horizon line or lower light emitting, and that I think would go a long way to having a light impact. Can we or ought we to make sort of recommendations along those lines, or is this the wrong venue for that sort of?
I don't want to say categorically it's the wrong venue. I think if you and the rest of your fellow colleagues have something that staff should consider, I think we'll take that and work with that internally and come up with a response for you at your public hearing. To clarify, Commissioner Sarley, our zoning ordinance, some zoning ordinances in other jurisdictions throughout the country do have lighting, lumens, foot candles, full cutoff. Get very, very detailed and very technical very quickly. We don't have that in our zoning ordinance. That's not to say that we can't or won't in sometime in the future. But if this is something that you and your colleagues see as something that should be a strong consideration, we'll take that and discuss that internally and provide some sort of feedback to you.
Also just add that whatever may not live in the zoning could live in our design guidelines document.
Right.
Where we refer to like best practices, we can refer back to the dark sky rules. So if it's not in the zoning, we could put it into the guide.
Make it a reference. And I'm sensitive to the fact that there's a little bit of a time crunch on this one since the rolling out of the TOS and the COGO issue on August 15th. So perhaps this is something that we can flag for an ongoing conversation via guidelines, or keep looking at zoning updates,
iterating
and lighting, because I think that's has multiple impacts beyond just the neighborhood. It has like bird friendly issues. It has environmental issues. So forth. Yes, Commissioner Peters.
Just a quick question about your suggestion to have it in the guidelines versus zoning. From an enforcement perspective, though, that doesn't have as much weight, right? So.
Anyone else? Brett, do we have enough feedback? Do you have enough feedback from us? Or too much feedback?
Well, I think the commission is understanding sort of the intent and the protectiveness that staff sees in our adopted policies for those the POPs. Brett's slide really talked about how the POPs are really an extension of our public park system, for lack of a better word. And so, we'll want the commission to really focus in on those findings for the county board. Should a use permit be warranted or considered, we feel that it's a really a high test that a restaurateur should meet in order to use public space for a private commercial business to the exclusion of other members of commissioners highlighted. So I think sort of another key takeaway, by and large, you're seeing a set of regulations that are more flexible. We have coordinated quite a bit throughout the course of the past year. I haven't been in those meetings, but Brett has been with Arlington Economic Development. There's, in the retail plan, there's the primacy of outdoor dining, the activation, the pedestrian experience is one of the things that really our adopted policies call for outdoor cafes as something special and important to our sense of place in Arlington. And so things like allowing for more permanent fixtures on only the private property, not within the public right of way, certainly not within the house, but on the private property. What was another one that was, trying to think of another one that was perhaps relaxed in some way, shape, or form. I'm not thinking of one. Well, just the fact that an outdoor cafe would no longer require a use permit within the public right of way. You need that license from the real estate bureau, but getting rid of that use permit requirement, we feel is going to be well received by the restaurant community. But then at the same time, we have, like you've heard from Mr. Kearns tonight, we are particularly sensitive to the experiences that residents have had adjacent to our residential communities. I believe, Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, there was some there, and if I'm just misremembering, let me know. Some of the public feedback that came in the early phases of the study, there was some sensitivity to outdoor noise, hours of operation, some of the general spillover effects, things like Commissioner Lantelme talked about previously. So you're seeing some advances and some further restrictions. For example, the sound entertainment when the outdoor cafe is located next to an R or an RA district. So there's a balance. It's complicated. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. And so I personally, I appreciate the Planning Commission hanging with us on what has been a pretty challenging thread to deal with.
Question.
Yes.
And it isn't something that would be resolved in this particular thing, but during the time of the emergency, and we had less parking because it was being used by East Coasters. Did that have anybody notice any changes in parking in the surrounding areas? Have there been complaints that there was fewer spaces available, or people complaining they couldn't find a place to park to go to restaurants, or the restaurateurs saying, gee, we're losing customers because we lost these parking spaces? I mean, did we notice any impact one way or another to park, or was that just nothing?
We checked with our partners in DES Transportation. I forget the name of it, but they have a customer complaint portal, has a unique name. Escaping my mind at the moment, but they did confirm that throughout the pandemic, they didn't receive any complaints through that portal. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not exactly scientific.
Yeah,
But it just strikes me because so many of our parking requirements have no rational basis. They're just sort of pulled out of thin air. And this almost goes to proof of concept that that's exactly where we get our parking requirements from, just pulled out of thin air. Because when we all of a sudden took away a whole bunch of parking, nobody noticed.
Something that I sort of brought up with last time during the Zoom meeting, that there were also less people driving because of the pandemic. So
Yeah, I know. It's, can you, how much can you read into that?
Right.
Just, this is one of my hobby horses.
I know.
Parking has no rational basis. Parking requirements. We end up hobbling ourselves in so many ways of planning because of, oh, we have to have parking. Well, we don't. Why do we think we need? Anyway, so just, if it's just more of an aside.
Hand up.
I just want to say thank you. I really am supportive of outdoor dining. Was very cautious during the pandemic and appreciated all the outdoor dining opportunities. I do think it activates the business, especially the small business owner. I like cheesecake factory. One on every street corner, small businesses are better too. So anything we can do to help the small business while also respecting the neighbors is wonderful.
Great presentations, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was turning to you, Mr. Chair, because I wanted to make sure we had a roundtable of the items that staff has been asked to kind of report back on. I know there was a comment about the ABC standards, how that affects the configuration, the openings so I've got ABC on my list. We talked about dark sky cutoffs for lighting. Commissioner Streiner, I don't know if there was an ask of staff on the enclosure in the winter months. there's some sort of analysis or findings that we can provide,
I
less.
mean, why?
You know, on that enclosure means something.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that's around.
Yeah.
Tenting.
Yeah.
But I mean, why would that be? Why would it be allowed?
That's right, the industrial, yes.
It's not.
I think I'm understanding how
Yeah.
we can help better.
Because if you can do it by permitting industrial. Anything type of field.
And then there may have been other things that we said we can get back to you that I might not have written down with, yeah,
What about the immediately in front of the restaurant?
yes, yeah. We're gonna take a fresh look at that language to make sure it's utterly clear that along the facade of the business, that whether it's on this
So
street or on
many
this
restaurants
street,
have more than one, two,
Yeah.
three, some four.
I might have a little bit of an ask on, that the next time you bring this to the planning commission, can give us a little bit of sort of expectation management on enforcement and or citizen complaint venues, and to, what we can do to help both of those situations so that people that are frustrated with something have a place where we can hear clearly and
Yeah.
substantively what's going on, and also what we can do after that to enforce, notwithstanding what you call it, the clag.
the clag,
The clag.
yeah, that's unique to Clarendon.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, we can sort of then expand that to the county. Anyone else have any closing statements or anything they want to say? Anyone online?
Commissioner Berkey and Commissioner Weir. Silence.
I very much enjoyed the
No
discussion.
comments. Thank you for chairing.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Thanks for attending. With that, I think,
You do have some other members of the public who are attending here in person. It is at the end of the meeting, so.
yeah, do we have any public speakers? I don't know that we asked that already. Thank you. Thank you, Ned. With that, thanks staff. Thank you all for coming on a weeknight, and we will see you at our next meeting. Thanks for signing.